الرجيم. ألف لام ميم. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم. نزل عليك الكتاب بالحق مصدقا لما بين يديه وأنزل التوراة والإنجيل من قبل هدى للناس وأنزل الفرقان. إن الذين كفروا بآيات الله لهم عذاب شديد والله عزيز ذو انتقام. إن الله لا يخفى عليه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء. هو الذي يصوركم في الأرحام كيف يشاء. لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم. صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah, brother. Welcome everyone. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thanks for joining for today's event. It's a talk by Dr. Prof Ghaly, our speaker from Qatar, who's given a time, and he will be speaking to us fairly shortly. And thank you everyone for your time today evening. Before I start the introductions part, I just want to acknowledge and thank everybody who is here today, especially the teams from Australian Islamic Medical Association, all the office bearers, the president, the secretary, and the executive committee members. I will now ask Dr. Asif Raza, who is an intensive care and anesthesia consultant in hospitals in Sydney, to give us an overview, a brief overview of Australian Islamic Medical Association and activity for those who may not be aware, and then we will start the event going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Habib. My name is Asif Raza. I'm the intensive care consultant and anesthetic consultant in Sydney hospitals. I thank you, all my audience, for sparing your valuable time this evening to participate in this seminar, which is organized by Australian Medical Association. In short, you may call it IMA. IMA is organized for you. You know very well that there are hundreds and thousands of doctors and other allied health professionals spread across this beautiful Australia and New Zealand. IMA is structured, firstly, and relatively a difficult task, to unite all of those health professionals. And secondly, to inspire them, which is a relatively easy job, to use their strengths to serve our profession and our patients. And along the way, you will make some wonderful friends across Australia. So please visit IMA website, imamed.com.au, for further information. So Australian Islamic Medical Association is here to unite, to inspire, and to serve. IMA is for you. Let us, IMA, serve you better. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Asif, for the introduction. And I would now ask Dr. Farid Habib, one of our colleagues from Sydney, to introduce the main speaker. Dr. Farid Habib is a general practitioner working for many years in Sydney. She has been involved in a number of community initiatives, including establishing a vaccination hub at the Lebanese Muslim Association in Lakamba, the main masjid. and also has played a lot of role in helping with vaccine hesitancy within our communities, particularly Muslim communities and Arabic communities. She's also been involved in other charity initiatives and also with Cancer Council and many others. So I would like to ask Dr. Fariha, please take over from here and introduce the main speaker. Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Habib. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Australian Islamic Medical Association, it's a great pleasure for me to be introducing the esteemed Dr. Ahmad Ghaly today. Dr. Ahmad Ghaly is a professor of Islam and Biomedical Ethics at the Research Centre for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, located at the Centre for Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Islamic Studies from Al-Azhar University in Egypt, a Master of Arts and PhD degrees in the same specialization from Leiden University in the Netherlands. Dr. Ghaly's main specialization is in the intersection of Islamic ethics and biomedical sciences. He is presently the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Islamic Ethics, published by Brill. Dr. Ghaly has lectured on Islamic bioethics at many universities worldwide, including Imperial College London, Oxford University, University of Oslo, University of Chicago, and Georgetown University. He is the author of multiple books, many journal publications, and is an investigator on numerous funded research projects. Thank you, Dr. Ghaly, for your time and for sharing your professional expertise on this crucial topic. I'm sure everyone who's joined us tonight is very keen to get started. I'll just remind everyone to please remain on mute during the presentation and write your questions in the chat box, which we'll get to after the presentation. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Ghaly. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. Many thanks for Dr. Habib, for the nice introduction of Dr. Fariha, for everybody. It's always my great pleasure to be in collaboration with colleagues from outside our field of Islamic studies and religious studies, and to share thoughts about important issues like the one that we will discuss today, inshallah. So my talk today will be about the questions related to vaccination in general, and of course with main focus on the vaccination developed for the COVID-19 pandemic that we are going through at the moment. Of course, one of the nice things, still positive and good aspects of such a pandemic is that it motivates us to address such ethical dilemmas and challenges, and to be in contact with each other despite the great distances that we have. You are now beyond 7 o'clock. We are still here at 12. The good news is that the world has seen the evening and no big troubles so far. We are still at noon now. But of course, such pandemics which hit the whole world, and now our planet Earth, of course, raises difficult questions and ethical dilemmas that every society and every individual tries to address them from the moral world that we are affiliated with. In this case, of course, the shared moral world that we have in this setting is the Islamic moral tradition. This is the, we'll show you, the outline of the lecture today. We will start with some lessons from history, because the pandemic that we have at the moment, the COVID-19 pandemic, is not the first pandemic. And the vaccines developed to address the virus causing this disease is not the first. So we can imagine that similar discussions have happened in history. We try to have an idea about what kind of discussions happened, what kind of lessons we can learn from them. And then we focus more on the discussions on COVID-19 vaccines in particular. And by the end, we will have some concluding remarks about what I think important points from this whole discussion, historically speaking, in our modern time. So let's start with the history. The first known vaccine developed for pandemics in our modern time. So I don't hear speak about the detailed historical overview of how people dealt with infectious or contagious diseases, etc., and what the Chinese did and what some insights in the Islamic civilization happened. So putting this aside, in the history of modern medicine, the first vaccine to be developed for pandemics was the one developed by the British Edward Jenner. He died in 1823, but he developed this in 1796, if not mistaken, towards the very end of the 18th century. When he did this, there was heated discussions, not only at the scientific level, but also at the ethical level in England and in the Western discourse at this time, European discourse. But what is important for us, for the sake of this lecture, is that the vaccine developed for the smallpox, as they call the smallpox vaccine, it was not only in England, but it found its way to Baghdad at this time. We had Uwanis Muradian, this is how his name is. Uwanis Muradian will be the, if we may call it, the spokesperson of a smallpox vaccine and the main activist, pro-vaccine activist, who will introduce this to Baghdad and later on to the rest of the Muslim world, and his attempts will raise discussions. And people will respond sometimes by concerns and sometimes by welcoming positions to what he did. Uwanis Muradian is originally coming from Istanbul. At this time, the Muslim world was under the reign of the Ottoman Empire. But he was based in Baghdad at this time when Jenner introduced the smallpox vaccine. Uwanis Muradian is an Armenian Catholic businessman. Some would wonder, what would an Armenian Catholic businessman have to do with Islamic ethical discussions on a vaccine? Uwanis Muradian was someone known not only as a businessman, but someone who has a strong thirst for knowledge, looking for modern scientific advancements, what happens in other nations and in other parts of the world, and his multilingual skills and proficiency helped him to trace the news, the recent news of these modern discoveries. So he knew, of course, Armenian, he knew a little bit of Arabic, he knew Italian, other European languages, etc. So he read about the smallpox vaccine and what Edward Jenner did. He was curious about it. He read about it. It seems he got some training. He learned how to do it. Of course, you know better than myself that the smallpox vaccine was not something like the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine or Moderna vaccine, for which you need so much labs and patents governing all these things. Were much more simple by the end of the 18th century. So it would need some training in order to do this vaccination for smallpox. Uwanis Muradian could do that, and he was quite enthusiastic, and he wanted to introduce this to the people living in the city where he was living at this moment, that was Baghdad. Historian sources speak about failed attempts in the beginning. When he tried, it didn't work. People were not willing to take this vaccine. Historical sources speak about al-awham al-sa'ida, so widespread delusions, misconceptions that people caused vaccine hesitancy at this time. We don't have so much details. Sources do not provide us with so much details about the basis of these delusions, except some brief references about religious beliefs And these religious beliefs mainly had to do with the belief in divine predestination, qadr. If God predestined everything to happen, why would we take these vaccines that may cause also a new disease to the people, etc.? So it seems religious convictions had to do with that. And it's not clear, of course, that these religious convictions were particular to a specific religious group, let's say the Catholic Christians, like the group of Uwais Muradian himself, or the Muslims, majority of the people living in Baghdad at this time. It seems from available information that it crossed the religious boundaries. So both Christians and Muslims and maybe other religious groups had similar religious preservations related to their belief in the omnipotence of God and that God decides everything. Why would we take such risky stuff? It seems also by scrutinizing the story of Uwais Muradian, that scientific aspects also had something to do with this. People were also hesitant, not only because of religious convictions, but because of their fears if these vaccines will actually work. So their efficacy, their safety, etc. So Uwais Muradian, in order to overcome this initial failure for his attempts, he did two things. The first one is that he vaccinated his own son in public, in front of the people, so that people will have an idea. If there is anything wrong about this, I wouldn't do this to my son. And then he started to recruit, if we may say, the big names and big figures in the society. So in 1810, he could convince the chief mufti of Baghdad, Ahmad Effendi, and sometimes he is described as Ahmad Effendi al-Hasif, Ahmad Effendi, the wise man, convinced him to get vaccinated in public, together with his 6 sons, 6 children and grandchildren in public, in the presence of luminary figures, luminaries in Baghdad, so that people will see that. And this incident really influenced the people. And later on, he had a very successful 9-year campaign in Baghdad, through which he could vaccinate about 5,500 children. 2/3 of them were free. Then he moved his campaign to other neighboring cities like Mosul, and then also to other countries like Iran, etc. And his campaigns were quite successful throughout the Muslim world. Only sometimes the campaign would suffer some ups and downs. For instance, when he left to Iran, the campaign in Iraq, untrained people were involved. And then some unfortunate incidents would happen. People were not vaccinated properly. So he trained his own wife so that she will lead the campaign in his absence. And then things went well again on the right track and so on. In order to improve the success and public outreach of his campaigns, Uwais Muradian in 1814, anyhow, after the case of the chief mufti of Baghdad, he started collecting testimonials from the people who got vaccinated or whose children got vaccinated, including the mufti of Baghdad. This was, sorry for the bad image, but this is the best thing I could have from the available sources. This is the more or less the template of this testimony that was signed by people in Baghdad who got vaccinated, in which they are giving their tributes and showing their thankfulness and gratitude for Uwais Muradian, and they used to call him Uwais Muradian al-Islambuli. Al-Islambuli here in reference to Istanbul in Turkey, because this was his origin. So from 1810 and so on, they said that he vaccinated his own son in front of us. He introduced this new vaccine, and it got good appeal. It appealed to people from different sects and different religious groups من جميع الطوائف, and we hereby submit our gratitude تقدمة الممنونية to this good person. And then it is signed 1840. So here, this is one of the very early, if not the earliest, examples where Muslims had to address the question of vaccination. This was the smallpox vaccine, and you see here also there is interreligious aspect. So the one who introduced himself is a Armenian Catholic, but still the chief mufti of Baghdad had to be in the beginning. There was a negative response. And then when Muradian understood the religio-cultural context and could develop new mechanisms to reach to the society, things changed, and it was a big success. The second important discussion which happened in the 20th century, and it was again about smallpox vaccine. We have two figures here. Rashid Rida, or known as Muhammad Rashid Rida, he is a Syrian, a Lebanese scholar who was living in Egypt, where he established a very famous journal at this time called Al-Manar, which means the lighthouse. Al-Manar was quite revolutionary at this time, the journal, as a means, as a new technological advance used by religious scholars, because press was, and because of printing and the wide spread of this technology, reaching out to people around the world through a journal or through press was one of the modern techniques at this time. And the journal of Rashid Rida was one of the most successful and most read journals throughout among Muslims throughout the world, not only in the Muslim majority countries. As we see from the list of subscribers to this journal, we had people from South Africa, we had people from South America, we had people from Asian continent, from all over the world. He had subscribers, and not only subscribers, but also contributors, people who would contribute pieces to this journal. The journal, although it was a religious Islamic one, it was not necessarily only about Quran, Sunnah, Hadith, Tafsir, etc. But he would open the journal for people who would write, for instance, about health and well-being, let's say from an Islamic perspective. And also to contributors from even outside the Islamic tradition. And this is the case here with Mahatma Gandhi, the very famous Indian political activist. Mahatma Gandhi, he wrote a book which was originally a series of articles on a guide to health. This book, which was published in different languages, one of the Indian Muslims translated it into Arabic, and he published the Arabic translation in a series of articles in the journal of Rashid Rida, journal Al-Manar. In these articles, in these pieces that were published, or the series of the chapters of the book published, I think the 8th or the 9th chapter was dedicated to smallpox. And Mahatma Gandhi had quite anti-vaccine position in that. Mahatma Gandhi, his issue was this is colonial imposed vaccine. We speak here not about the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th, we speak about the 20th century. So we had a much long time. India was colonized by England, and Mahatma Gandhi was very well known for his opposition to this British colonization of India. So he framed the discussion on vaccination within this colonizing political discourse. Rashid Rida, his editorial policy for the journal is that when someone submits an article and this article will be published, it will not be censored. So when there is something that Rashid Rida would disagree with or think, for instance, that, look, this is not in alignment with the religion of Islam, etc., he wouldn't censor the article, but he would write his own comments, if any, in footnotes or in the notes to the article. This is what he did with the book and the series of articles, the Arabic translation of the work of Mahatma Gandhi. So he stated that in a footnote that he does not agree with how Mahatma Gandhi framed his discussion about smallpox vaccine. He said shouldn't be framed as colonial imposed vaccine, but vaccine is the fruit of scientific and professional work. There are scientists who worked hard behind it. It happened that this scientist was a British. It can be someone from India, it can be someone from Wales Air. So it is a science that should be seen through neutral framework. This is one. The second, he wanted to say to Mahatma Gandhi and those who would agree with him that opposing the vaccine is not exclusively something Indian as an anti-colonial movement. It is something shared by British people. There are British people, he said, religious, conservative British people who had problems with this vaccine because of religious preservations, as we explained in the case of Uwanis Morarian, related to trust in God, related to belief in divine predestination, etc. And it seems at this time there was a mandatory law in England that people would have to take the vaccine. And after some opposition, religious conservative people got an exception from this mandatory character of the vaccine because they are against it. They hold that it is against their religious conviction. So he said, at the end, you are not very far from British thinking. There are people in the heart of England who also have these ideas because of a religious perspective. He said, from an Islamic perspective, this is scientific, technical, professional issue. So it's about, like any other medical treatment, how effective it is and how safe it is. So when we make the calculation, scientific professional calculation, and we end up saying that it is safe and the expected benefits considerably outweigh, there is what we call al-dhann al-rajih, predominant likelihood, that the benefits will outweigh the harms, then it is accepted. And he said, in our time, trustworthy physicians that we know all say that this smallpox vaccine, the benefits of this vaccine far outweigh its harms. And we hardly heard of anybody who received this vaccine and their health condition deteriorated or got worse, etc. On the contrary, it always gets better. So Rashid Rida said, to my opinion, this should not be framed as an exclusively religious theological issue in which we are going to debate those who receive the vaccine have less trust in God, or more, those who do not have more trust in God, etc. It shouldn't be like that. This is a scientific, technical issue related to strict harm-benefit assessment. This position from Rashid Rida may explain to us why we don't have so many fatwas, at least at this time. In the COVID-19, we will see many fatwas, but I mean, at this time, 19th and 20th century, we don't have the topic of vaccine, and we had many vaccines with other pandemics and other viruses, many the polio, so many tetanus, and all this stuff. We don't have so much fatwa speaking about them. It was not a big issue in which you will find those who are for, those who are against, and why, etc. It was a side issue most of the time, maybe because they sided with Rashid Rida that this is something that should be fixed by the physicians, not necessarily by religious scholars. So as long as the physicians can come to agreement about harm-benefit assessment, then we simply support them, and it shouldn't be a big deal for religious scholars. This is the history. This is the history where we see clear link and communication between what's happening in the West, this time England, and what's happening in the East. This can be the Muslim world like Baghdad and Iraq, Iran, or it can be India, and India can have communication with a journal based in Egypt, and a religious scholar like Rashid Rida would respond to Mahatma Gandhi. So it was, we speak about a pandemic, and we also speak about a pan-moral discourse, global, transnational, global discourse. When we come to the COVID-19 vaccines, I will start with a general overview of the starting points of the religious scholars when they discuss the COVID-19 vaccine, especially those who support it, of course. They said that, like Rashid Rida, it's one of the forms of medical treatment, tadawi. So someone, he has a problem with the health condition, and medicine would interfere in order to protect the person from the disease or restore the health, etc., preventive, curative, whatever. It's part of medical treatment and the concept of tadawi in Islam. And he said, within this framework, religious scholars from the beginning of Islam till now, the mainstream position, they say at the minimum level, it's permissible. Forms of tadawi, whether they are now vaccines or curative, preventive, etc., in principle, it is permissible. There are voices within the Sufi tradition, they said, which stated that taking medical treatment to improve your health condition is, morally speaking, religiously speaking, inferior to trust in God. Inferior to trust in God. So to have trust in God, you will be, morally speaking, superior than those who would take the means and try to treat themselves. In these fatwas, people
what are we good at? What are we going to keep doing? What do we need to keep working
I think
on?
there is something, I don't know. Should I stop for a while?
Sorry, can everyone go on mute, please?
Maybe you can mute
Hello?
everybody and then unmute me.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll just
it's
try
okay.
that.
No
I
problem.
think he's unmute now. He's mute now.
Shall I continue?
Yes.
Okay. So they said that Rashid Rida was quite straightforward by saying that this issue shouldn't be discussed within the framework of trust in God, better, inferior, superior, all this stuff. But in these fatwas, they explained more. You have references in these fatwas saying the following. Getting sick and looking for means, medical interventions to restore one's normal health condition, all happens within natural laws that God himself has created. So they say God reveals information to us through two possible types of revelation. One of them is the revelation that we have in scriptures, like the Quran and Sunnah. And this we have to read, understand, analyze, and implement. But this is not the only way through which God reveals knowledge to us. The other way is nature that God has created. And this nature has been created in such a meticulous and precise way that it is governed by very precise laws and consistent laws. All what we need as humans is that we contemplate and think in the same way we contemplate and read the written revelation, the book that we have. Also, we need to think and contemplate and examine this open book that we can see and observe in order to come to conclusions. So when you come to a treatment for a disease, you are dealing with a divine revelation. And when you read the Quran and come to a religious ruling, you are dealing with a revelation. So it is not that it's either or, that you follow the Quran or you examine the nature. The source for both is God. They speak about kitabun mastur, written book, wa kitabun manzur, observable book. And in both cases, you are dealing with the Quran. So it is a great misconception to think that when I don't take the medical treatment, which has been approved on basis of experiments, etc., recommended by the physicians, I would be less loyal to the laws of God than the one who would say, no, I will wait and God will heal me. Here they would refer also to some pre-modern religious scholars, those who say that if you want to be consistent, okay, you think that taking up the laws in nature and following them would be means less trust in God. Okay, you need to be consistent all the way long. So when you feel hungry, you shouldn't eat. Why? Because God decided and predestined that you will be hungry at 1 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock you will not be anymore. So okay, you follow that. When you are thirsty, you don't drink. And this is completely absurd for any person who has a sound mind. They will not accept that. So if you make a medical treatment an exceptional case, you will be inconsistent. There are laws in nature, and we believe as Muslims that they are made by God. And there are laws. These are laws, so they are consistent, and they are always there. And yes, God has the power to change them through miracles or something like this. But these are miracles, and these are exceptions. But these laws are there, and we are all invited and encouraged, and in certain cases obliged to go and discover them, in the same way that we are obliged to do this with the Quran and so on. So it shouldn't be an issue about trust in God, about divine predestination, etc. So why? Because it is part of respecting the divine scheme of creation. You cannot take a knife and put it on your neck and to say that if God decided that I will not die, I will not die. This happened with Prophet Ibrahim. This will be insane to do that, because there are laws. If you respect God, you have to respect these laws. There is an issue about vaccination which can make vaccination a little bit particular case, other than other forms of medical treatment. What is this? Is that we are giving the vaccine to a healthy person, not to a sick one. And this vaccine can make the person sick in one way or another, not necessarily of this harsh disease that we are trying to protect the person from. But for instance, as we now do, I myself, when I took that, I got fever 2-3 days, etc. So you get sick. So here is the question. Does this make vaccination, morally speaking, exceptional and should be treated as a distinct category other than the general category of medical treatment, which is at its basic form permissible, mashru', religiously permissible? The religious scholars who asked about this, they said no, it shouldn't be. Why? There are a number of the so-called legal maxims, al-qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, and these maxims have been developed and phrased by Muslim religious scholars throughout different centuries, long period. They would study a huge number of cases at the casuistry level, and then they would ask themselves, what would made religious scholars judge all these cases in the same way? There is a rule behind it, even if they didn't express it. It seems there is a rule, and then they would formulate this rule, which we call legal maxims. Like, for instance, necessity breaks law. الضرورات تبيح المحظورات. It's an agreed upon principle in Islam. Why did they come to this? Not necessarily because of one single verse in the Quran or one prophetic tradition, hadith from Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but because huge number of cases, and then they come to this legal maxim. They said here a number of legal maxims explain to us that vaccination shouldn't be treated as something exceptional, but a form of medical treatment like other medical treatments, and should be judged in the same way. How? They said that sometimes the expected will be treated like reality. This person who is healthy, why are we giving the vaccine to this healthy person? Because this person may get sick, and we don't want him to get sick. So it's preventive. So the fact that he is not sick doesn't make him to be treated, when it comes to the vaccine, as really healthy person. No, it will not be. So they say sometimes we will treat al-waqi' kal-mutawaqqa'. So what is expected will be rated as if it is an actual reality. Why? Because the likelihood that the person will get it is very high. It's pandemic. It's a pandemic. It can happen to everyone anytime. So we cannot say, oh no, this is a healthy person, don't touch, and this is a sick person, try to address. Why? We don't have something for the person when the disease happens. We can only interfere at this moment before it happens. So here, al-waqi'u kal-mutawaqqa' wal-madhnunu kal-mutayaqqan. It is not really sure that this X, for instance, Muhammad Ghaly, will get the vaccine. We are not sure about this. Maybe the person will never get the disease, even if it is a pandemic. Also, this will not count. Also, this will not count because of the pandemic context. Because of the pandemic context. And in this text, in this context, the healthy person will be treated like the sick. Why? The likelihood that he will get sick is very high. Once he gets or she gets sick, we have no treatment. If he gets the disease and he doesn't have serious side effects or something like this, can infect others who may die even from this disease, etc. Because of this context, we cannot say that giving a vaccine to a healthy person is something different than giving paracetamol, for instance, for a sick person. This is the general frame, and how should the vaccine be approached from a religious moral perspective in Islam. It is a form of medical treatment whose basic value or basic judgment is permissibility. It can go higher, recommended, or even obligatory, as we will see later. But this is the basic frame that they used. Two big issues have been discussed. One of them related again to what Rashid Rida was speaking about, safety and efficacy, and also what Muradian has encountered. Are these vaccines safe and are they effective? It's the risk-benefit assessment. All religious scholars, by the way, those also are anti-vaccination, they said that this part of the discussion is to be judged and evaluated by medical experts, Ahlu Dhikri, as they are named in the Quran, people of special knowledge. In this case, biomedical experts. And then we will have wide disagreement about who are these medical experts. Who exactly should I ask as a religious scholar or as an individual? Generally, there is widely different approaches in this regard, but there is, generally speaking, more preference for institutions than to individuals. So religious scholars and institutions like the Islamic Fiqh Academy, International Islamic Fiqh Academy, European Council for Fatwa and Research, they would like to ask to get confirmation from institutions rather than individuals. And this has something to do with the religious, the juristic mindset, al-aql al-fiqhi. As a religious scholar, I always think about minority position, majority position, consensus. Ra'i al-jumhur, what the majority of Muslim jurists decide, if they all agreed, etc. So if I approach one physician and this physician tells me, look, vaccines are safe and effective, how would I know that his opinion or her opinion is representing the mainstream position in the medical community? As a religious, I cannot verify this. So the best thing is that I go to institutions. Some of these institutions are mentioned by name in some fatwas. For instance, the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA, is mentioned as one of these trustworthy institutions. When they license something, okay, we will accept it. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the name is mentioned, especially in the context of some supposed concerns about vaccines, like causing infertility for Muslim women, etc. They would quote some research produced by CDC, World Health Organization, also mentioned in some of them. And there are also the national institutions. So, for instance, if I am in Saudi Arabia, the Fatwa Committee in Saudi Arabia, I would invite the Minister of Health, or I would write a letter to the Ministry of Health asking them, how do you judge these vaccines, etc. When I get a letter, I would say, okay, this is enough for me, and I will judge accordingly. And we have seen also in Muslim societies living as minorities, like your case. By the way, I have to express my admiration for the declaration made in Australia, and in which there was clearly a consultation. The fatwa had an appendix about the questions they raised to the physicians, and the physicians, how they answered them, etc. So as a fatwa institution in Australia, I would like to go to Muslim physicians in Australia, their institution, and they will tell me what to do about this. The same also for England. They would also consult with their associations or institutions of Muslim physicians living there, etc. So sometimes it's at the national level, sometimes it is at the international level, with overall preference given to institutions than to individuals. Of course, there are cases, especially individual fatwas. The Mufti would say, I contacted my dear friend X or Y and Z, and he told me that. Some of these Muftis, their own sons or daughters or grandsons or granddaughters, they have studied medicine or biomedical sciences. They will say, I consulted with them and they told me that and that. But this is less common than consulting or following the instructions and guidelines of these international institutions. So this is the first important element that fatwas would address. But here they would need external advice coming from biomedical experts. These are some of the questions that muftis or fatwa institutions would ask, and it is mentioned in the fatwa published in Australia, like, are the COVID-19 vaccines safe in general? And then they would say, is this your own opinion, or this is the opinion agreed upon by medical experts all over the world, etc. So is it a mainstream position? Is it an individual position? Is it a consensus position? They are very much interested in this, because this is how fiqh works, how Islamic jurisprudence works. Can the vaccine change or allow tracking my DNA? As I said, do all medical professions share the same opinion about the vaccine? Can the vaccine cause sterilization and fertility for Muslim women? Especially the last question is not a question exclusive to the COVID-19 vaccines. We have seen this for many years, especially with the case of polio vaccines. Polio vaccine, we have seen opinions expressed by religious scholars in Nigeria in Pakistan and in India, especially these countries, Somalia, I think also, that they have concerns, these religious scholars have concerns that these vaccines would cause infertility, and some would speak about conspiracy theory, etc. It happened, I wrote about this in my book on Islam and disability, because polio vaccines, causes the paralysis of the children, one of the causing agents of disability. So I wrote about this incident in my book. Because of fatwas, some fatwas, especially in the city of Kano in Nigeria, by the beginning of this century. And the vaccination campaign stopped because of this. And this resulted in the birth of about 300, more than 300 children who got paralyzed because of the polio. When the International Islamic Fiqh Academy knew about this incident, they were quite angry. They issued a declaration, more than one declaration, in which they harshly condemned the fatwa issued by these scholars in Nigeria. And they insisted that parents should not follow these fatwas because they don't represent the mainstream position in Islam. They consulted the World Health Organization, Muslim doctors working in World Health Organization to get confirmations whether these vaccines are safe or not. Do they cause infertility or not? Of course, we had these questions also for the COVID-19 vaccine. And as I mentioned, the CDC published different studies about this. So they would follow the people who got the vaccine and got pregnant after the vaccine, successful pregnancy, not successful pregnancy, so many statistics about this. It seems from what I read so far that it has even sometimes, in some cases, positive impact, not a negative one. So this was about the whole discussion about harm-benefit assessment and how to judge this, how religious scholars would go with that. The other important element of the discussions is about the ingredients of the vaccine, the components, the materials that compose the vaccine. Concerns about whether these vaccines contain what we call impure ingredients, ritually impure ingredients, المواد النجسة, like porcine gelatin, for instance, things coming from the pig, or prohibited materials, like some spoke about cells of aborted embryos or fetuses. We have in Islam a rule that when something is prohibited, you cannot benefit from it. So when there is an illegal abortion that happened, you cannot benefit from this abortion by taking tissues or selling them or buying them or stuff like this, because the whole issue is prohibited. When there is a sin, you cannot make benefits. Like someone who is on travel, but he is on travel to assassinate someone, and still this hit person is, mashallah, so religious, so that he wants to pray and make benefit from the concession of combining prayers. The jurists would say, no, you cannot benefit from this. Why? Because you are on a religiously prohibited travel, because you want to kill someone. So there are these technicalities. So impure ingredients or prohibited materials contained in the vaccine. First, some fatwas made it quite simple that some vaccines do not have this problem, like Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. And there are statements issued by the manufacturers of these vaccines that they don't do such controversial material for Muslims, and by the way, also for many Jews. So, and this makes the issue closed, so there would be no discussion. But they said, imagine that there are such materials in the ingredients. They said there is a general rule or maxim in Islam that if this is the only available treatment, so we have a disease, we cannot prevent it, we cannot contain it unless we have this drug or this vaccine that contains impure ingredients or prohibited materials, it should be permitted. if it is the only option, because of the maxim الضرورات تبيح المحظورات. Necessity breaks law. In order to give some more details about why did they come to the conclusion that it can be possible even if it contains these materials, they said that impurity, najasa, whether it's physical or ritual in Islam, is not always categorically and indiscriminately prohibited. There are forms of impurity which we call them excused or pardoned impurity, and najasa al-ma'fu anha. So there is impurity, but still we can live with. And this excused or pardoned or exceptional impurity has conditions. It will be declared permissible on the basis of certain conditions. One of them, for instance, if this impurity is by proximity, al-mujawara, it is not a core business of the material that I'm dealing with, but it is close to it. It has proximity to it. They said, when it comes to the porcine gelatine, for instance, as part of the vaccine, it is the best perception is that it is impurity by proximity, najasa bil mujawara, as we call it. Why? Because the porcine gelatine, they said, based on consultation with the physicians, that it is not a core part of the vaccine, but it is used as in the storage of the vaccine as a stabilizer. So when you get the vaccine, it is not in there, but it is when it is stored. There is also a najasa which will be permitted because of its tiny size. And they said, if we look at the vaccine with our eyes, no one can say that it has pork, for instance, or has ingredients from a dog or from a pig or something like this. Why? Because the parts that came originally, let's say, from a pig, so tiny and microscopic that no one can see it. This tiny size of the impurity will be permitted. And there are so many discussions that demonstrate this issue in the Islamic tradition, that it should reach a specific size and take a specific space from the material we speak about till we can declare this material as having impurity. The third point, which is also important, is transformation. When a jurist, when a faqih judges a material, he does not look at the original, but he looks at the final product, how it looks at the end, in its final phase. And we have the very famous example with wine transforming into vinegar. When you leave the wine, whether with your own intervention or you leave it just to the nature, it can transform and becomes vinegar. In Islam, consuming wine is categorically prohibited, but consuming vinegar is permissible. Yes, but this vinegar was originally wine. Should we care about this? No, we shouldn't care. Why? Because the final product we have had gone the process of transformation. We call it al-istihala. It moved from hala to hala, from one state to another. We care about the final, not about the original. So if we have, for instance, components from a pig or something prohibited, and then it has moved to be a different chemical substance at the end, if anyone looks at it, if anyone tries to smell it, taste it, etc., it doesn't have any of the characteristics of this forbidden material, originally speaking, then it should be also permissible. Another condition is about the general principle, known principle in Islamic jurisprudence called umum al-balwa. When we have a case or an ethical dilemma that relates to one person or group of persons, this is a moral category and a case. And when this relates to society in general, the greater part of the society or to a country, not to mention whole inhabitants on earth, this is something else. So in the former category, relates to an individual, etc., the mufti or the jurist can be strict because we have one person here and we can adjust the case of this one person. But in the later category, which we call it umum al-balwa, something that hits everybody, we have to be quite permissive and lenient. Taysir. Why? Because there is no, one of the legal maxims, there is no hardship in religion. Religion shouldn't be the cause of making people's life hard and difficult, because this is against the very purpose of sending and revealing religions to the humans. Religion is revealed to the humans, as we understand in Islam, to make their life here in this life easier and to give them salvation in the hereafter. That's the whole purpose. Salahud darain, well-being in this life and in the hereafter. So, and there are also many examples, like for instance, the streets in cities like Al-Fustat, for instance, now Cairo in Egypt, or Baghdad in Iraq, etc. You will have the people who will go to their own fields and come back with the animals, etc. You will find the remains of the animals mixed with the mud in the street, and people's clothes will get in touch with this mud that would have some impure elements coming from the animals. Okay, can we say to the people, you cannot cross these streets? Whenever you cross these streets and your clothes will touch anything of the muds in these, because we have the possibility that it will have impurities? Well, no, we don't do that. Why? Because of umum al-balwa. They said the case of possible impure ingredients in these vaccines, almost all these conditions apply, not only one. If you have only one, it will be enough to categorize them as excused or pardoned or permissible impurity, not to mention when we have all of them. So this is in the case that we have them. When they came about the religious ruling, we said that medical treatment to which vaccine would belong is in principle permissible, but it can move. We have al-ahkam al-khamsa, we have 5 categories. Permissible is the neutral one, but it can move to the right by saying recommended or obligatory, and it can go to the left by saying reprehensible or prohibited. So medical treatment is permissible, but it can move to the other 4 categories. So the great majority of them said permissible, with very few voices, scholars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Nigeria, saying that it is prohibited because of one of the reasons that I mentioned, either risk-benefit assessment or including these ingredients as we discussed them. But the mainstream position, the dominant majority position, it's permissible. Some would raise it up to the level of recommended because it is a pandemic. We cannot contain the pandemic without this vaccine, etc. And we have a public benefit, al-maslaha al-amma, for which individuals should be more proactive. And some would mention also obligatory. They said obligatory here is making it available. So the country is under obligation to make it available for the people, for its citizens, whether people consume or not, but the state is under obligation to do it. Some said that it will be obligatory if the state mandates that. If the state says, for instance, all healthcare professionals must take it. Okay, then we have to listen to the states. This has to do with their understanding of wali al-amr and mandates coming from the political leader. Some said that it will be obligatory for vulnerable groups, people who are categorized as vulnerable. So if they get the vaccine, the likelihood that their health condition will be extremely compromised, or they may even die. In this case, we can judge that for these people, taking the vaccine will be obligatory, because it will not be only for avoiding a disease, but for saving life. And saving life in Islam is an obligation, is not an option. I would say one of the strange things I found in these discussions, to the best of my knowledge, I didn't find fatwas saying that it is a collective obligation. In Islam, we have individual obligations, like praying 5 times a day, like fasting during the month of Ramadan, everyone has to do it. So I cannot say my father prayed today, so I don't have to pray, because it's not a collective, it's an individual obligation. Each and every individual has to do it. But we have also other obligations which are collective in nature. Collective in nature. Like, for instance, praying the funeral prayer. If someone died, some people have to do funeral prayer for the dead person. But imagine that no one did it, then the whole society will be sinful. This is a mechanism to encourage people to protect the public benefits. So we can say it is a collective obligation. As a society, we have to reach the threshold of herd immunity, that we can contain the disease. Once we reach that, it's not obligatory anymore. But as a society, it is a collective obligation. Finally, some of the concluding remarks about what I mentioned. We have a clearly mainstream position. By scanning and reviewing the fatwas and the whole religious discourse in Islam, the mainstream position is quite positive, at least permissible. Some would raise it up to recommended or even obligatory. I personally think that it is a collective obligation, but anyhow, quite positive. The transnational character is still there, like it was the case with the smallpox vaccine. We have questions coming from Malaysia, sent to fatwa institutions in United Arab Emirates or in Egypt, etc. Muslims from everywhere in the world correspond with each other. I think our case is a very clear case of transnational concern of Muslims. I'm living here in Qatar, you are in Australia. I don't know, people from, I suppose, different countries are listening to that. Interdisciplinarity, religious scholars are collaborating with biomedical scientists, with experts in this field, and it cannot be otherwise, as I mentioned, at least for the risk-benefit assessment. Do these fatwas and does this religious scholar have impact on the people? So do those who issue fatwa against the vaccination will make the people against the vaccination or vice versa? It's very difficult to come to conclusions about this. It's surely part of the social discourse that will have, in a way or another, an impact. But what makes me concerned a little bit in this regard is that the language coming from some religious scholars, they are afraid that anti-vaccine fatwas, they are afraid that they have impact, strong impact. So normally speaking, in Islam, when we have diversity of opinions, we mention that. So we say in this school of law, in the Hanafi school, it looks like that. In the Shafi school, it looks like that. And individual Muslims decide. So in this case, for instance, vaccination, we have people who say that vaccination is not in alignment with the Islamic morality or with the Islamic religion, etc. And they say this because of this, and this is a minority, and they are, we believe, they are in the wrong side because of this and that. Normally, this is the case. But you have, for instance, statements coming from the International Islamic Fiqh Academy and other institutions harshly condemning the fatwas that disagree with them. Maybe the case in Nigeria with more than 300 children who got paralyzed by the polio virus, made them quite angry about that. But this language makes me a little bit concerned. Most of the fatwas are more reactive in nature than proactive. So almost 99%, if not 100% of the fatwas that I have reviewed were issued not earlier than November, December last year. When Pfizer and BioNTech declared that their vaccine clinical trials are doing well and it's possible that it will be available for the market soon, then we started to have that. Of course, when you have that, so you are late, the vaccines are already in the market, so you will say we can use it or we cannot use it, that's it. But these vaccines are developed on the basis of clinical trials, which started as early as March that year. the fatwas from March later on till November or December, they are speaking about closing the mosques or not closing the mosques, doing congregational prayers or not doing the congregational prayers. That's the whole discussion. Should we pay zakat to the people who left their jobs because of the coronavirus? That's it. But no proactive discussion about how these vaccines should be developed. So you could say in March already, no, we are in the Muslim world. If you do prohibited ingredients in these vaccines, make sure you will not have marked in the Muslim world. At least those muftis who think that it is a break point. Let's do that from the beginning, not now on. So it was quite late. Also, how these fatwas dealt with scientists and dealt with political authorities. Scientists, most of the time, they are informants. So I ask you, does the vaccine have side effects? Are they safe? Do they cause infertility? That's it. But I don't give indication about how you as a scientist would do your work so that later I as a mufti would have an easy life. So when you develop a vaccine, it should be like that. When you do clinical trials, you have to take care of justice, for instance, that the burden and the benefits should be fairly and equally distributed. So don't do the clinical trial in poor countries where the poor people would rush into taking this vaccine. But when it is proved, when it is approved, you will give the vaccine to the rich countries and not to the poor people who participated in the clinical trials, etc. So that when I give a fatwa by saying vaccines are okay, there will be no ethical problems when I say that, because there was injustice, for instance, while developing the vaccine. Almost all the fatwas do not take this into consideration. Also, when we speak about the state authorities, the great majority of them, they said, if the state says, like Ministry of Health, it is mandatory, you are under religious obligation to get the vaccine. Okay. This is my obligation, but what about the obligation of the state? If the state put me under obligation to get the vaccine and I got side effects, it can happen. Who is going to fund my healthcare in order to treat these side effects? It should be the one who put me under obligation. So to say that I will be under religious obligation, you have to think of the other side and say the state is under obligation to create a fund that will help the people whenever there are side effects linked to taking the vaccine. This should be compensated, and so on. So of course these contemporary Muslim jurists, they operate within the discipline of Islamic law, fiqh, where the ethical discourse is not always that visible, because ethics in Islam is interdisciplinary. Ethics is not only fiqh. So there are ethics in adab, the genre of adab or adab, like the etiquettes of the physician, adab al-tabib, etc. There are ethics in philosophy, there are ethics in theology, etc. And those who issue the fatwa are treated in Islamic law, not in the broader field of Islamic ethics. I will stop here. I hope I didn't take too much time, but I will stop here. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to respond to them as far as I can.
Thank you so much, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Muhammad. It's been really very useful discussion. I would ask everyone to please stay mute. We do have some of our colleagues who have been watching the chat box, and they would be, I think, looking at some of the questions raised. And then, Dr. Muhammad, if you can please answer them or try and help us understand. Before we start the questions and answer session, I would just like to make a small announcement. Next month, that would be on 16th of October, we are having another event as well. So it's a Saturday and it will be around 8:30, inshallah. And we have another speaker, internationally renowned speaker, who will speak on digital transformation of health. So the topic will be digital transformation of health. And the speaker is Professor Shafi Ahmad, who is a multi-award winning cancer surgeon working at the Royal London Hospital. And he's been awarded NHS Award by the UK Member of Parliament in 2018. He also won a Silver Scalpel as a Best National Trainer in Surgery in 2015. He's also got a distinction of World's Most Watched Surgeon, stream live operations using Google Glass, virtual reality, social media, and on national television on Operation Live, which was shortlisted for a BAFTA award in 2019. He's an associate editor of technology and innovation at Annals of Royal College of Surgeons and a member of editorial strategic advisory board of BMJ Innovations. He's a TEDx speaker, an international speaker who delivered 250 keynotes in over 30 countries on innovation, the future of healthcare, and digital transformation. And he's been featured over 400 newspaper, tech journals, and mainstream TV news channels, including Sky, BBC, BBC World, CNN, ABC, Al Jazeera, Bloomberg, Forbes, Time, Guardian, and The Times. So it will be on 16th of October at 8 p.m., inshallah. Please do stay tuned for another fascinating talk. Sorry for the interruption, and hopefully that also gives Professor Mohammed a break, because I think he spoke for almost an hour and we don't even know how that hour has passed by. So thank you so much for really interesting talk. We might start with the questions now.
Jazakallah, Doctor. There are a few questions on the floor. I'll start with this one. If the mandatory vaccination, does Sharia recognize it for the common good?
As I mentioned, the fatwas that we have issued for the COVID-19 vaccines in particular, they approve that state authorities can make vaccination mandatory. This is the discourse that we have. I personally think that this is problematic, at least in certain aspects. One of them is that first we have to try our best to convince the people and to raise public awareness so that people will do it out of conviction, not out of compulsion. If this does not work, okay, then we can think of the mandatory act. And if we do the mandatory character of vaccination, responsibility should be shared. So if there are any possible side effects that will happen to the people, there must be funds coming from the state. So I myself, who was obliged to take the vaccine, I shouldn't take the responsibility of treating the side effects. The one who obliged me should be the one who did it. This is what justice is. So this is my own opinion, but who am I? I mean, the fatwas that we have at the moment have clearly stated that state authorities can make it mandatory. And by the way, making it mandatory is not also one single block. There are many nuances within it. So we can incentivize people to do it. We can push the people into the corner. Like for instance, in our university now, they say it's not mandatory. But if you don't take the vaccine, then you have to provide PCR tests every week to the university. This makes your life difficult. So many of the hesitant people, they would say, okay, for the sake of convenience, I will do it. So you don't have to make it mandatory, I suppose, in the strict sense of the way.
Jazakallah khairan. And there are a few questions which you already touched them, Doctor. First is about fetal cells from the miscarriage, if it is technically okay. And the second one was about the PIC materials. Do they change to any benign form or no?
Yes. I think I spoke about both of them. Maybe the fetal issues from miscarriage. What we have, they don't make part of the vaccine, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct me. They are used during the research phase and testing the vaccines on them. As I mentioned, what we call it, we always say that you don't use something resulting from a prohibited act, And we don't know how these so-called immortal cells are coming originally. They say it's coming from the 50s or the 60s, and then they are reproducing them all the time. So we don't know exactly how they were obtained. This is one thing. The second thing is that if you want to get into this discussion, I would say, but this is my advice to the religious scholars, you have to start it proactively, not retroactively. So when the people start their clinical trials, okay, you speak to them. Not when the vaccine is already in our hands and this is what we have, and then you start raising all these issues. But anyhow, the fatwa said that it's the vaccines that we have now are both okay from these both aspects. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Wajdi. I think Dr. Zina also has a question.
Yeah.
She's also helping us together, so she might have scanned some questions.
So thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad. That was a very enlightening lecture. So there's actually some questions in Arabic, so I might ask them in Arabic if you don't mind, maybe answering them in English. There's a question from Galaxy Note 9. متى يحرم التداوي كذا متى يحرم اللقاح?
Okay, so it's about when medical treatment, including or / vaccine, would be declared as prohibited. Medical treatment will be prohibited according to the mainstream position if it will produce more harm than the benefit. That's the main thing that will make it prohibited. So it will not be treatment anymore. It will be a very risky, unapproved situation. Then it will be putting your health at risk. And that's why it will be prohibited. Other scholars outside the mainstream would say that it will be prohibited if it contains this ritually impure or prohibited material. The majority would say it will be prohibited if we have alternatives which do not have this problem. And if we don't have alternatives, then it will be approved, especially the vaccine under all the conditions that I mentioned. Impurity by proximity, when the disease has a public character or pandemic character, when it is tiny in size, all these details.
There's a comment rather than a question by Sister Mariam, again in Arabic. I think you've just addressed it, but I don't know if you want to discuss it a bit more. She said that هذا إذا ثبت إثبات يقيني أن اللقاح الحالي هو علاج وثبت إثباتا حقيقيا أنه لا يترتب عليه ضرر مستقبلي لا يمكن إصدار أحكام عامة في حال وجود إبهام شديد وشبهة في اللقاح. الأصل في الفقه أثناء الشبهة هو درئها حتى يتقين سلامتها.
This is a very good question. Thank you so much. So she says that all what we say here, if we have certainty about the efficacy and safety of the vaccine, not the vagueness that we have at the moment about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. And I have two comments about this. First of all, it is not true that whenever we have certainty and doubt, or certainty and probability, we have to go for certainty at the cost of the probability. This does not work for everything. Like the case we mentioned here. So, and it's especially medical treatment. If we are going to wait till we have certainty, 100% safety and efficacy, I think the great majority of the drugs we have now, it will not be approved. So we speak, especially in medicine, about likelihood. People who undergo organ transplantation. If you read any pamphlet, it will say 1% of the people, 1 in a million, for instance, would die. These are the statistics we have. With all these things, you will never have certainty. And there is a Hanbali scholar, I don't remember the name now, who addressed this question a long time ago. And he said, وَالْيَقِينُ عَزِيزٌ. Certainty in medicine is not easy to get. So we cannot make people wait with their diseases and their compromised health condition till we have 100% certainty. But what we say, al-dhannu rajih, high probability, strong likelihood. And then we go. If we have certain medical treatments and medical treatment whose efficacy is likelihood, yes, for sure, we go to for the certain. But we don't always have this luxury that we have certain medical treatments and all this stuff. So this is about how it works in Islamic jurisprudence. The second thing about the drug, about the vaccine, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have vagueness. Within the mainstream scholarly medical community, we have the institutions that approved that, even if it is an emergency case, they approve that, and they are the same ones who approve the other treatments that we get. So if we don't trust them, we have to be consistent. Then we don't trust any medical treatment coming from them. So I don't see personally, I'm not a physician and I don't have medical background. I personally see this exceptionalism with which vaccine is treated is quite problematic. My readings as a non-specialist shows that vaccines, developing the vaccine is one of the big things that modern medicine is very much proud of. Vaccine is not exceptional in the things that it is vague and it is problematic, etc. Physicians are quite proud that they developed the vaccines because it is effective, it is safe, it has saved millions of the lives of people, improved their health condition, etc. But this is my impression. Of course, your association, you are the experts in this regard, but I'm speaking about my impression as an observer from outside. I don't think it should be treated with this high degree of exceptionalism.
Exactly.
Thank you. I think there are more questions, Dr. Wajdi or Dr. Zena, if you want to.
Yeah, Dr. Ghaly.
We might not be able to take all the questions, so maybe if you want to try and see which one are important, because it's almost an hour and a half, so maybe another 10 minutes if everybody.
I think I might touch this one.
Around.
Yeah, I might touch this one, Doctor, please, if you have any view on this. I mean, previously, when we go to Hajj or Umrah, we have some mandatory vaccination with the old diseases. And now they added COVID into that list. And now the debate in New South Wales about mandating vaccination for mosques. So how would the mosque committees would navigate this, you think?
To be honest, personally, I am pro vaccination, but I'm anti mandatory medical practices. In Islam, our approach to the human body, we deal with our human body as a trustee. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entrusted me with taking care of my body. He did not entrust my physician. He did not entrust the government. So I decide about my body in the capacity of a trustee, and that's why I'm not an owner. So I don't put my body into a life-threatening situation, because this will be against the owner, the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But beyond that, I am the one who will be held accountable before God. So I would say we go for mandatory practices if we have no other alternative whatsoever. So I would try with public campaigns, with informing the people, public engagement, and all this stuff. And once it will not working, I will do. And by the way, I find it problematic mosques only. So why not malls? We have here malls in the Gulf region where people move around much more crowded than the mosques. We need to have justice and equal treatment in this regard. But I don't exclude the possibility of mandatory vaccination because of the situation, because it will cost people lives, but only as a last resort, I would say.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Hatim has got a question as well. I think he scanned some questions. He's one of our members. Dr. Hatim.
So, Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair, Professor Ghaly. It's really an amazing talk and amazing discussion so far. I think most of the questions have been covered, but I think it's again a lot of questions that came across was regarding the obligation and whether it should be the case or not, particularly again in the context of mosques. Some questions came again regarding the COVID vaccination passports, and again that everyone is not allowed to go anywhere without this, and whether this is a method of discrimination that had been used.
Yes, vaccination passports is also, to be honest, also a quite controversial issue. It needs, there are so many nuances that need to be answered in that. So for instance, if we give a passport for people who has the vaccine, did we make in the first instance vaccine available to everyone? So if you make vaccine available to everyone, I take it and you don't, or you take it and I don't, okay. Then you say you had the option, you didn't take it. In order to protect public health, I don't give it to you. But if we have now statistics, published statistics, I don't know how credible they are. There are countries that ordered and purchased vaccines enough to vaccine each of their citizens 5 times. And there are countries who do not have 5 or 10 vaccines for their whole population. How come I give vaccine passports for these countries and not for the others? We will just exacerbate the division between the rich and the poor in our world. And I think one of the important lessons that we have to learn from this pandemic is that the virus did not differentiate between the poor and the rich. It has united us. So we shouldn't forget the lesson that quickly and use stuff like this that will deepen the problems. And as far as I see, again, as an external observer, the countries that will use the vaccine passports, they are using them for touristic purposes. These are touristic countries. They want to get the rich tourists, those people who had access to the vaccine, so that they can come and enjoy. And the poor people, just put them outside. These are all problems that need to be addressed before we discuss how ethical vaccine passport can be.
Another question as well that had been regarding the trials, medical experiments that had been done regarding the vaccination, and particularly those that had been done in the poor countries. How ethical is this approach from an Islamic perspective?
Yes, we have had discussions, long discussions about this. We have the International Islamic Code for Medical and Healthcare Ethics issued by the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences. This was published in 2004 or 2005. It spoke about these clinical trials and ethics of clinical trials. Justice is one of the key principles that govern clinical trials, the distribution of burdens and benefits. We have seen, I don't know how the clinical trials of these vaccines were developed exactly, but I heard about cases, for instance, Pfizer, I think, BioNTech in Chile, one of the cases that had troubles or side effects or maybe died. So it seems that these also these vaccines were, the clinical trials were conducted outside, if we may say, the mainstream Western world, maybe also inside, I don't know. But we need to make sure that there is justice. The people who will undergo the clinical trials and do a certain level of sacrifice in order to advance science cannot be prevented from the benefits of this science because they don't have the money. So there must be fair distribution of the burdens and the benefits. Otherwise, it will be unethical, even if it is halal or permissible. I mean, what these scientists are doing, what these companies are doing, we have to judge it as something unethical.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Dr. Wajdi, Dr. Zina, do you have any burning last questions which we may have missed which we can pose to Dr. Mohammed before
from
we
my
close?
end. Thank you so much, Dr. Habib. From my end, I think most questions were addressed by Dr. Ghaly. So I couldn't see any unanswered questions so far. There's some discussion between the members, but most of the questions have been covered.
Dr.
Yeah, me too.
Wajdi.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah, it looks good. All good. Thank you very much.
Dr. Hatim, is there any other questions from you? Is there a question, and I might ask, and you might rephrase it, around intensive care and end of life with COVID and how that might play out, or what happens around that, or any potential issues which Dr. Ghaly can help us?
I think that's very topical as well for us, as we are currently seeing a lot of those patients and ending up in very severe situation. Many of them are staying on life support measures, and on some of these occasions we end up in this situation that we are actually seeing there is no hope. We keep doing our best, and then we have to discuss with the families what's next and what can we do. And on some of these occasions, we consider the palliation or the comfort measures to be provided to the patient. How would the Islam be dealing with this from an ethical perspective?
This is, of course, a very, very complex issue. We had last year a whole research seminar dedicated to the theme end-of-life care in the Islamic moral tradition. We are at the moment working on the publication. Hopefully it will be available soon, inshallah, maybe by the end of this year, the beginning of next year. Just to keep it simple, because I think this needs a whole...
We'll organize another talk, inshallah.
Yeah, it needs to do the justice to this topic. Generally speaking, outside the COVID-19 context, is it possible to switch off life support machines while the person is still alive, even if we know that switching off this life support machine may contribute to the end of the life of that person? The answer of the great majority of Muslim religious scholars, yes, especially in the case of diagnosis of brain death, even for those who do not recognize brain death. So you recognize brain death or not, doesn't matter. Those who are diagnosed with brain death, can we switch off the life support machines for them? All Muslim religious scholars, including those who disagree with brain death, they say yes. If we have incurable disease, or what we call it, stopping the life-sustaining treatment, LSTs, in case of futility, as we call it, is it possible? The Islamic Fiqh Academy a couple of years ago issued a fatwa that yes, we can do that. When it comes to the pandemic, it's even harsher, because we can have people waiting in the line, have to choose among them, and we have to do the triage, the difficult triage. So we will treat some and not treat the others. The governing principle here, in general, is that the physician, the treating physician, is under obligation to save as many lives as possible. That's the governing principle. So if I have 10 people, I can only save 5. Then I save the 5. And the other 5 will die? Yes, the other 5 will die. Because we have no other option. We are not in the best possible scenario. So I will select the people where the likelihood of saving their life is higher. And those who have lower likelihood of saving their life, then they will be excluded. This is very, very difficult situation, I understand. But this needs a whole different setting to discuss. But this is just the general principle. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I might just check one last time for any of our 3 colleagues who helped with the Q&A session. So Dr. Zaina, Dr. Wajdi, and Dr. Hatim, do you have one last question before we finish the session?
Yeah, thank you. Jazakumullah khair.
May I have a last question, Dr. Habib?
Sure.
Okay, so I think also we have here a vaccination of children. So I know also the concept of consent. So adult can consent for the vaccine, but how about children who are their parent anti-vaccine? And can you just shed a light on these issues?
Yes. If we don't speak about mandatory vaccination, because mandatory vaccination will overrule people's autonomy, which I find it problematic in principle, unless we have good reasons to do otherwise. Generally speaking, people have to give their consent, in which it should be clear about any possible side effects, or things should be clear, and people should sign their agreement. And we speak here about people who have legal capacity, or in Arabic, al-ahliyah. So they are of age, they have the mental capacity to decide, they can understand what you say, they can express their own acceptance, rejection, all this stuff about autonomy. For children under age, which age? Usually scholars, especially the Hanafi school, they differentiate between, so they would take the 9 years old as an important borderline. After 9 years old, we would ask for their assent, not consent. So even mainstream bioethical discourse make this, that they don't object. They are okay with that. You will need the consent of the legal guardian, al-wali, whether it is the father, the mother, the uncle, the one who's taking care of the child, and the assent of the child, that the child is not against taking the vaccine. This will be the ideal situation. But legally speaking, most of the time, the consent of the guardian is enough.
Jazakallahu khairan.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all the time. I think we've gone over time. Still, we can see that the 95% of those who started with us, they've stayed till the end. And it just highlights that how excellent the presentation was and how engaging. Towards the end of the session, I will ask Dr. Ali. He is a respiratory consultant. He's also been on call for COVID patient today, and luckily we still managed to have him, to finish the word of thanks. So I might ask Dr. Ali to please do the word of thanks for us, and we'll close the session, inshallah.
Sorry, is it too late for a question?
I think we will have to stop it at the moment. I think we have gone already, a fair bit over. So if you have any questions, you can leave in chat box and we can ask Dr. Ghaly. You can send it to him and get.
I did already send in the chat box. It wasn't answered.
Thank you for that. We will close the session just for the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot again for this kind invitation. It was a great pleasure to be with you all. I hope I could say something that makes sense. And I would like to use this opportunity, if I may, to inform you about our international conference for our center, the Islamic legislation, the Islamic Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics. The acronym is CILE, C-I-L-E. We have an international conference this Monday and Tuesday on virtue ethics in the Islamic tradition. And I'll talk about the virtuous physician in the Islamic tradition, Tabib al-Fadil. It's an open event. Everyone is welcome. I can send you in the chat the link on our website. The colleagues can share it with the others. If anyone is interested, it's an open. Anyone can attend. And there will be also Arabic, but everything will be translated. Thank you so much.
Yes, Dr. Ali, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Habib. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. On behalf of Australian Islamic Medical Association, I would like to thank Professor Ghaly for a very insightful and a timely lecture today. Most of us who are present here are either directly or indirectly involved in the care of patients with COVID. And we see the devastation this disease is bringing. And we also see this disproportionate high number of people from the Muslim community. And there's certainly a lot of misinformation in the community. And the questions and concerns that sometimes are related to actually fiqh, and Dr. Ghaly has addressed them thoroughly in a very academic way. I must say that the Islamic medical ethics is rich and certainly has answers to the questions faced by the Muslims in the modern medicine. I'm actually amazed by such a rich history of Muslim medics like Rashid Rida, who was so progressive and ahead of their time and applied the medicine beyond the socio-political influence. I think Dr. Rida's explanation around the impurities was very valuable, as it is not only this vaccine, rather we do come across with a lot of other medications where the impurity questions comes along. So in summary, I think it was an excellent opportunity for all of us to learn from a very valuable scholar. We really appreciate your time for this excellent information today. And I thank all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We'll ask Dr. Asif Raza to just make the dua to close the session.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آل محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad, again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Dr. Muhammad, what time is your talk? Some people are asking on
my
this
talk.
conference.
My talk is on Tuesday, I think around 5 here. So now it's 1:50.
Okay, so 5
So
p.m. on Tuesday.
it's after like 3 hours from now.
So it's around 12 o'clock midnight here.
Okay.
We're gonna be asleep by that time.
Sorry for that. Sorry, but everything will be recorded and it will be available on our website. No problem.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Inshallah, we will ask you, we'll invite you to come back again and do. There are so many other talks.
With
I think
pleasure.
it's very difficult to cover.
As long as there is time, I can do everything.
Inshallah.
Thank you so
Would
much.
it be possible?
Thank you.
Would it be possible to send me the recording?
Yes, we will
If
place
possible.
on our website. We have been recording
Okay,
now.
then it's perfect.
So
Then
once
I will
we
share
finish
it on my
we will send
Twitter.
it. Yes, definitely.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you
you,
so much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Jazakallah khairan.
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Have a good evening, everyone.